It's Wednesday, August 7th, 2024. The pick is in just who is Tim Walz and another thwarted assassination attempt next on the AM Update.
Some of us are old enough to remember when it was Republicans who were talking about freedom. It turns out now what they meant was the government should be free to invade your doctor's office. In Minnesota, we respect our neighbors and their personal choices that they make. Even if we wouldn't make the same choice for ourselves, there's a golden rule. Mind your own damn business.
Unless, of course, you're talking about getting a COVID jab, not wearing a mask, or minding your own business, unless, of course, it's your business that's locked down, a la COVID back in 2020. That is Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. He is the choice from Kamala to be her running mate for president in 2024. The announcement was made yesterday morning with a first rally last night in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Just who is Tim Walz after all? Here's this post from Greg Price from the State Freedom Caucus Network. He allowed Minneapolis to burn to the ground during the George Floyd riots. He oversaw a $250 million COVID fraud scheme, the largest in America, and was called out by a judge for lying about the scandal. He forced COVID patients into nursing homes, resulting in mass deaths. He imposed draconian lockdowns and set up a hotline so people could snitch on their neighbors. He signed a law giving illegals driver's license, free college, and free health care. He supports cities refusing to comply with federal immigration laws. He said that he'd invest in a ladder company to help illegals climb over a border wall. He signed a law putting menstrual products in boys' bathrooms. He made Minnesota a quote-unquote sanctuary state for so-called child sex changes. See that as meatball surgery and chemical castration. He legalized infanticide with one of the most radical baby murder laws in the country that repealed the state's law requiring babies born during a botched abortion receive medical care. Education spending increased under his watch in Minnesota has less than half of children who can read and write and do math at a grade level. And he just said recently that Trump and his supporters are fascists. There is one more thing that's even more galling that tells you just who Tim Walz is. We'll get to that more a little bit later. As I hinted at yesterday morning, this all but confirms the Democrats have a major anti-Semitism problem over on their side. To pass over a much more capable and much more consequential, at least on paper, governor in Pennsylvania's Josh Shapiro. He was passed over in favor of Walz, and there's only one explanation for that. They were afraid what would happen with some of their base if they elected a Jew to serve alongside Kamala Harris. Now, there was a piece that came out in Politico yesterday detailing how Shapiro actually went to Kamala Harris and bowed out of his bid to be vice president, but that's just a fig leaf. The real story here is that anti-Semitism is large and it is in charge on the left. Republican vice president candidate J.D. Vance had these comments in reaction to the news.
This is a guy who's proposed shipping more manufacturing jobs to China, who wants to make the American people more reliant on garbage energy instead of good American energy, and has proposed defunding the police just as Kamala Harris does. I think it's interesting, actually. They make an interesting tag team because, of course, Tim Walz allowed rioters to burn down Minneapolis in the summer of 2020, and then the few who got caught, Kamala Harris helped bail them out of jail. So it is more instructive for what it says about Kamala Harris that she doesn't care about the border, she doesn't care about crime, she doesn't care about American energy, and most importantly, she doesn't care about the Americans who have been made to suffer under those policies.
Now, yesterday evening during that introductory rally in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, it was extremely well done. It was well staged. It was highly attended. A lot of people, that packed arena. That was very, very well done on the part of the Democrats. Very little substance was talked about, though. Very little policy was actually discussed, unlike what you just heard there from J.D. Vance. If Republicans at large, including the Republican nominee, can channel what Vance just channeled there, getting this off of personality, getting off of the cheap jabs that you heard that Tim Walz take last night at that rally, Republicans might just have a chance to win this election, but that's a big if, given we're talking about the Republican Party. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has been on the absolute warpath for the last 24 hours in talking about Walz and Kamala. Here he is yesterday at an event for something unrelated in Florida, where he absolutely unloads on the Democratic ticket.
We all remember the BLM riots of 2020 in Minneapolis. Those were riots that Harris egged on and raised money to bail out the rioters with the Minnesota Bail Fund. And they're riots that Tim Walz, as governor, sat back and let happen. he sat back and let the city of Minneapolis burn. That city has been gutted as a result of those riots. We would never allow that to happen in the state of Florida. So this is a ticket that really represents the spirit of those 2020 BLM riots. And you have a very vapid San Francisco Democrat, and then you've got a Ilhan Omar-style leftist, Tim Walz, who has the same policies as his fellow Minnesotan Ilhan Omar. We do not need an America that represents the failed policies of San Francisco or the failed policies of Minneapolis. We do not need to see poop on the street and cities burning down. That is not a prescription for America to work its way back. And I can just tell you, as governor of Florida, particularly in that 2020-2021 period, people fled those jurisdictions, and they'd come to Florida and they would tell me about the mismanagement and about letting the inmates run the asylum and how that just destroyed the quality of life. And so I think it was in that period you were 5 times more likely to move from Minnesota to Florida than vice versa. And that's a result of people fleeing those failed policies.
Whoever is running the messaging at the RNC, whoever is running the messaging at some of the major Trump super PACs, maybe they should hire Ron DeSantis, because he hits the nail on the head here. It's Minneapolis-style leftism and Sharia law mixed with the San Francisco failed policies for going on a generation now. It's those two entities versus the rest of America. That should be the message going forward for Republicans. Speaking of Donald Trump, a Pakistani man with ties to the Iranian government sought to carry out a political assassination in the United States, a case that was investigated weeks before a gunman tried to kill former President Trump at that Pennsylvania rally. Asif Merchant, a 46-year-old, traveled to New York City and worked with a hitman to carry out the assassinations in late August or early September. That's according to federal prosecutors talking in a court complaint. The complaint says the plot was intended to target high-ranking U.S. officials, potentially including Trump. U.S. Attorney Breon Peace for the Eastern District of New York said, quote, "Working on behalf of the others overseas, Merchant planned the murder of U.S. government officials on American soil. This prosecution demonstrates that the office and the entirety of U.S. Department of Justice will take swift and decisive action to protect our nation's security, our government officials, and our citizens from foreign threats." Merchant was arrested on July 12th while preparing to leave the U.S. He told investigators that he has a wife and children in Iran and a wife and children in Pakistan. Tim Walz, as you know by now, is a rabid communist. He is a full, dyed-in-the-wool communist. He doesn't make any bones about that either. He doesn't try to hide that other than the, aw shucks, I own a gun, I go hunting, and I coach my football team in high school for a while. That surface level stuff is just a facade to hide what's truly underneath. If you want to know truly who this guy is at his heart level, at least as best as we can as other human beings, listen to this story from 2022, courtesy of Alpha News in Minnesota.
The public needs to know how pathetic his leadership was as a National Guardsman.
On a 150-year-old farm in Brewster, Tom Behrens hopes his tell-it-like-it-is style will finally get the attention he believes it deserves in Minnesota's race for governor. In a way, he's back again to wage a public war of words against Tim Walz.
He abandoned us. What the hell kind of leader does that? As soon as the shots were fired in Iraq, he turned and ran the other way and hung his hat up and quit.
We'll get to Behrens' new message for voters in a moment. But this all starts years earlier, when Behrens says Walz's misleading statements about his military service first led him to come forward in the fall of 2018. So you try to get this message out, but Minnesota's largest newspaper checks it out, says it's 100% true, but yet refuses to print.
When I hung the phone up, I said, what the hell is this, North Korea?
Back in 2005, a warning order went out to the 1st Battalion, 125th Field Artillery to mobilize for a mission to Iraq. At the time, Walz served as the unit's highest non-commissioned officer, but months later, Walz would retire from the Guard, avoid the deployment, and run for Congress. Tom Behrens was next in line for the position and was asked to take his place.
I was like, well, for Pete's sake, if this guy quit, And if I say I'm not going to do it, I mean, what the hell kind of leadership is that? If a company would say that we're going to deploy to Iraq or somewhere and you're going to be gone for whatever amount of time, and then the foreman just says, no, I'm not going. I mean, what does that say to the 500 people that work in that factory?
Behrens would go on to serve in Iraq on a nearly 2-year deployment as a command sergeant major. All while Walz began using that title as a congressman. Behrens says he first contacted Walz with his concerns, sending these letters to Washington. They all went unanswered. But then we fast forward to the election in 2018 in Minnesota, and you try at that time to get people's attention with this story and also with what seems to be a very misleading statement that he continued to make about his service.
It kind of just sat there. When he was a congressman, he bragged that he was a command sergeant, retired command sergeant major. I'm the highest ranking person ever in the House, and all this lie that he was telling. The state of Minnesota came out after 2018, after this was exposed, and they said, well, he can say that he served as a command sergeant major, but he can't say he's a retired one because he's not.
And that's what he was saying.
And he was saying that, and there was lots of lots of cards coming in the mail, for him to be elected. They said right on there he's a retired command sergeant major, just tooting his own horn, just hanging on the coattails of people that actually are command sergeant majors that went through all the process and put all the time in.
A spokesperson for the Minnesota National Guard said Walz wasn't able to retire as a command sergeant major since he failed to complete coursework and requirements related to the rank. Verified documents show the Army corrected his service record. Walz was reduced in rank to an E8 Master Sergeant after retirement and his conditional promotion. Alpha News again asked Governor Walz if he's using the command sergeant major rank on his campaign website for political gain this year. A spokesperson said this has been in the news before and pointed us to a past story where Walz said, quote, normally this type of partisan political attack only comes from one who's never worn a uniform.
It's stolen valor is really what it is. I don't know of anybody else that's done what he's done, but we called it the truth about Tim Walz.
In 2018, Behrens gave the story the full court press.
We, retired command sergeant majors of the Minnesota National Guard, feel it is our duty and responsibility to bring forth the truth as we know it concerning his service record. I put together information on it and I sent it out to every single radio station and newspaper and TV station I could in the state. The bottom line in all of this is gut-wrenching and sad to explain. When the nation called, he quit.
Twin Cities TV stations and the Star Tribune were silent, even after Behrens says the newspaper checked it all out. The Star Tribune endorsed Walz in 2018 for governor. Between lockdowns, riots, unchecked crime, and a charred police precinct, Behrens felt he had no choice but again to come forward.
Allowing that to be burned down was just like having the Alamo get burned down. It's like, no, you defend that to the last man. If he would have went to Iraq, he'd still be hiding under his desk over there, because that's just the cowardice that I seen portrayed with him.
So how about when he also comes out and he calls you guys 19-year-old cooks?
I'd take any 19-year-old cook before I'd go to war with him. I don't know how he could even utter such a statement. I mean, it's just absolutely sad.
So this election year, it's all built up again to Behrens' new grain bin message.
He called Jacob Fry an abject failure. So I was like, that's what he is.
Walz is a traitor, also made a return.
And the last one I put together, he said it himself too, as well, if they don't like my job, they can vote me out. So I wrote, vote him out. We need to vote him out.
That story courtesy of Alpha News in Minnesota. They are a tremendous follow. They do some really good work up in the People's Republic of Minnesota. At Alpha News MN on X is how you can follow them. So that's who Tim Walz really is. Stolen valor. Lying about his position in the military. And when his country called him, he ducked and he retired. Now, I'm not one to criticize. I've never worn the uniform. But I have to think those who have would hear a story like that and take that with offense. Take that with a great deal of umbrage. This guy is a craven opportunist. And just happens to be a rabid communist as well. That's who he really is. And finally, air analysis, slightly acidic, mostly necessary. He might just win. He and Kamala Harris might just win. Take them for granted at your own peril. Don't take this seriously at your own peril. Democrats never, ever, ever plan on losing. I saw the take bandied about several times yesterday morning as the news was breaking about Tim Walz, that this was some sort of tacit admission from the Democrat power brokers, but that they knew that this election was a lost cause. Nope. Get that out of your mind right away. They never plan on losing. They have several contingency plans, yes. They have several contingency narratives, yes, they do. You better believe. And maybe this time around, maybe they have more contingency narratives than the last time around, because they might actually be concerned about this, but they don't plan on losing. As long as this thing is within the margin of cheating, meaning they can manufacture enough votes on election night and dump them off in the dead of the night, they're going to do that. If Republicans continue to be put off message, don't make this about issues. Don't make this about the myriad clips I've seen over the past 48 hours, both from Kamala and from Tim Walz, just exposing themselves as absolute, one, incompetent idiots, and two, when they are competent, they're competent only in fluent communist. If they don't make that the main thing this election, it's on them. No more sleeping her way to the top, even though that is true. That's just a frill. No more, oh, she has a weird cackle. That's true. That's just a frill, though. Make this about solid issues. Expose them for the absolute crazy communists that they are. I don't have great faith in the Republican Party at large, particularly this nominee, that they'll be able to be this disciplined for the next 3 months, but that's what needs to happen. Take this seriously, because they are. I promise you that. That'll do it for today. Back at it again tomorrow morning. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.